Hello, my name is Gene Gilmore. My birth given name is Eugene Reuben Akers. I don't want any money for what I'm doing because hopefully this video won't come out until after my death. So I have nothing to gain, nothing to profit by telling you what I'm going to tell you. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you is available online until they see this video, and I'm sure things will start getting scrubbed, as well as moon photos. But anyway, my father in 1968 was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. I made notes on my computer so that I wouldn't forget anything, because there's a lot of little things and stuff that I'd forget. So these notes were made a long time ago. The original recording that my father made on his deathbed was destroyed in a fire. So this is my deathbed confession, because now I'm dying of cancer. I've got cancer all over the place, and they don't know where it's coming from, and I don't know if they can stop it, but it don't look good. So I'm going to go ahead and make this video for Bart Sibrel. He knows not to do anything with it until notification of my death, for which my son will respond to that. Okay. Like I said, in 1968, my father was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. We lived in Clovis, New Mexico. He was in the military police for over 20 years. And on his deathbed in 2002, we made a recording of what happened. Now, I already told you what happened to the recording. But it doesn't matter, because all the facts are there. So it doesn't matter who's telling the story or whatever. I will, at the end of the video, I'll supply a picture of my father, his badge, the flag of when they buried him. I'll show you some photos of my dad. I was born in 1955. So in 1969, I was 14 years old. I vividly remember the Apollo 11 coming down, landing on the moon, and they're walking around and all that stuff. Anyway, I never questioned that until my dad told me what he told me on his deathbed. And then I started doing a little, nothing major, nothing, just surfing the web, I think they call it, surfing the web. And a lot of that information's right there on the web. I mean, it verifies the story that he told me. A good detective, a good one, would be able to uncover a lot more of the story than I'm getting ready to tell you. So, please have at it. I've never known my dad to lie. To get caught lying was worse than whatever it was you did to begin with. I remember going to school with long sleeve shirts on to hide the purple welts. You did not lie in our house, that's for sure. Dad had a really bad attitude towards lying. Excuse me again. Okay, anyway, this is the story that my dad told me on his deathbed. Project Slam Dunk was the name of this. President Johnson in 1968, okay? In Cannon Air Force Base in 1968, he said by the time he got there, that there was already 2 large hangars that were connected. There was hundreds of dump trucks that came in and dumped sand and stone, and cement powder was powdered over the top of all that to make it look like a lunar landscape. They had men that fashioned it into a lunar landscape, he said. Okay, I've never known my dad to lie, so this all took me by surprise. You know, what's that all about? So anyway, he said that in front of the airplane hangars was pole framing with large canvas tents that was concealing the inside of the staging area. Inside the staging area, on flatbed trucks, was uncrated the lunar lander that was reassembled back inside the hangars. All of the walls were painted flat black, and the ceilings as well. He was sworn to secrecy by the NSA, and they would put him in prison for breaking that oath. And when Dad saw the moon landing on TV, he cried. He said he knew that what he had witnessed on TV was exactly what they recorded in that hangar. There was no reason for them to go flying around and everything. They had detailed high-definition photos of the landing area. There was no reason for them to go flying around to a different landing area that almost exhausted their fuel, except for drama, because everything had gone so smoothly. Nothing, so it had to be something. Anyway, Dad was one of 3 guards that guarded the inside of the front entrance. There was a list of 15 people who could enter. No one else was allowed by order of President Johnson. And here is that list. And I gave it to Bart Sibrel as well. And he checked out a lot of these names, and he says he can verify a lot of these people and what they do. And I come across a couple myself. Anyway, President Johnson, Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, Werner von Braun, Robert Emenegger, Gene Kranz, James Webb, Joe Kerwin, Dr. Thomas Paine, Glenn Looney, Dr. Christopher Kraft, Dr. James Van Allen, General Trudeau, Lieutenant Colonel Donald Simon, and Grant Norrie. Now, the only 2 that I really have information on is Robert Emenegger. Apparently, he did a lot of video work and stuff for the Department of Defense. So the DoD did know him. Okay, and the other one was Grant Norrie, Norray, I believe. Was to the best of my dad's knowledge, was a like some FBI, CIA, NSA, who knows, something like that. Okay, President Johnson only showed up for the first day of filming. Filming lasted for 3 days, and the entire project was restored to original. In other words, the hangars were all taken apart, the sand was all removed, and so on and so forth. Okay. Dad said there was a lot of building going on at the base, so at the time, so sand and cement powder was never questioned. I can see how they could smuggle that all in within everything else that's going on. Since 2002, I have dug up, I already told you about that, the evidence for the moon landing that I have found. If you go to Google and go to Cannon Air Force Base website, they admit that President Johnson was there. The lunar lander was there. The astronauts were there. I also have verified some of the people on the list were there. I also verified there are a lot of building going on in the base, just as he had told me. And all of this was going on at the same time, on the same date. Dad told me all these things, father to son. He also told me not to ever tell anyone what he had said, but he said on his deathbed that he had to tell somebody before he died because it was just too important not to tell. I sure as hell wasn't going to tell anybody. Yeah, I feared for my wife and me and my son, and I'll tell you why. Ever since I contacted Bart Sibrel, I think they may be listening to his phone once in a while, because I never had any problems until I contacted him and told him my story. Now, people broke into my house 2 times. I was visited by men with black suits, and I was told in no uncertain terms to drop this whole project, not to say anymore to anybody, or me and my wife and my son could disappear. You take that pretty literally after everything that's going on. Well, so I stopped contacting Bart, and now I'm making this video that I'm going to send to Bart. Mr. Sibrel, excuse me. Bart's my brother, man. My brother in heart, my brother in Jesus, okay? Bart, being a good friend that he is, called the police for me and told them about the break-ins. The 2 detectives that came out and everything questioned me and everything like that, I didn't give them any information at all. At the time, I thought it was a test from them guys in the black suits. I didn't say crap. So all that went away and everything. But it definitely, the 2 guys in the black suits were not the 2 detectives that came out to question me about the break-ins. But thanks, Bart. But no, I don't want any help. I just want somebody to pick up where I left off and be able to prove with the information I've given. And I'm trying to give as much as I can because I know that once I die, I'm not going to be able to be asked any questions. So that's why I tried to give you a little backstory too. But that's about all I can think of. My dad, he raised me by the book. I know he didn't lie to me. And as I started seeing more and more of what he was telling me was true, I realized my dad wasn't lying. I lifted the lid off my dad's case, and you can see his name is Cyrus Eugene Akers. He was born on July 17th, 1933. He died on September 28th, 2002. Here's his badge, and I wanted to see if I could get as close as possible so that you can read the numbers on the bottom, which are, okay, there it is. $07596. 07596. That's my dad. And it must have been a really early picture because he's only got 2 stripes, so that was back in the 50s, I'm sure. Probably not long after I was born. And there he is. That's my father. My dad, he raised me by the book. I know he didn't lie to me. And as I started seeing more and more of what he was telling me was true, I realized my dad wasn't lying.
Today's broadcast is particularly significant as we mark the 54th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, an event celebrated worldwide as a pinnacle of human achievement. But what if this historical milestone isn't quite what it seems? Our returning guest today, the award-winning filmmaker Bart Sibrel, is known for probing into these exact questions, shedding light on these possible dark corners of the celebrated mission. His relentless pursuit of the truth has led him on a harrowing journey, crossing paths with secret government agencies and uncovering hidden aspects of America's famed quote-unquote Apollo missions. In his revealing memoir, Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list, Sibrel recounts these thrilling, real-life espionage adventures. His expose includes private audio recordings of an Apollo astronaut allegedly plotting his assassination and provides the first ever reveal of the CIA's official code name for the real Apollo project, along with numerous other shocking revelations. On our program in 2015, Sibrel brought forward some mind-boggling insights. This time, he is set to delve even deeper, presenting new information about a recent deathbed confession claiming the Apollo 11 mission was filmed on a military base. This intriguing narrative promises to take us on a fascinating journey through the complexities surrounding the moon landing conspiracy. So buckle up as we embark on this enlightening exploration with Bart Sibrel, whose persistent courage in the face of adversity is a testament to his commitment to uncovering the truth. So don't go anywhere.
Welcome to Veritas. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To access tonight's full interview and all of our exclusive material, simply join the Veritas Plus family by clicking on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. And while you're there, don't forget to check out the Veritas store for a range of great products, including Focused Life Force Energy. Experience the power of FLFE with a 15-day free trial today. No credit card required. We're excited to announce the launch of our brand new Veritas Plus Insider, your source for exclusive news and insights you won't find anywhere else. If you're looking to get in touch with Mel, have a guest suggestion, or would like to provide feedback, simply click on the contact button on our website. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's show. And now, here's your host, Mel Hastelrick.
His website is Sibrel.com. And back on Veritas, I would like to welcome Bart Sibrel. Hello, and welcome back, Bart. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Mel. How about yourself?
Doing great. And by the way, it's been 8 years since we last spoke. And I had to have you back because not too long ago, I saw a video that you posted on the internet, a deathbed confession. But first of all, tell us what has happened in the past 8 years. What new updates can you give us on the Apollo mission or anything else?
Well, I'd like to first kind of lay the foundation, what we knew before my recent book came out, which is at Sibrel.com, and audio that I read, Kindle or print. Before the book came out, we already knew the following, which is basically 4 times the evidence necessary to prove in a court of law that, unfortunately, the moon missions were indeed falsified. That first proof is simply the logic, because today, with 50 years better technology, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is only 250 miles to the space station. Now, that's 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're claiming is, back in the 60s, when all of NASA's computer power combined had 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, they sent astronauts 1,000 times farther back then than they can send them today, ahead of schedule and on the first attempt. Just putting the Hubble telescope into Earth orbit, which was done 30 years after Apollo, with 30 years better technology, they were 10 years behind schedule. NASA has never kept a schedule in their entire history, except the most complicated one of all time, which is 1,000 times farther into space than they can travel today with 50 years newer technology, which means their claim is that for the first time in recorded history, technology was greater in the past than in the future. But that's a historic and scientific impossibility, and that means they perpetrated a fraud, like a bluff in poker. Then the second proof, which you can see for free, just go to Sibrel.com, click on the top left button. It's called Moon Man Video Links. My new book has 16 interactive video links to support what I'm saying in the book. I write a chapter, and then I say, now go to link 1, another chapter, link 2. Well, you can see here in the film, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which cost $1 million to produce and was financed by someone who builds rockets for NASA, who knows that the missions were fake, who wants to remain anonymous. And they thought it was their patriotic duty to expose it. So I was the biggest fan, believing the moon missions are real, like everybody else. Even had a shrine in my house of moon pictures up for 10 years that I saw every day, year after year. And so I'm producing this film under the theory it might be true that they faked it, because I had a guy with high security clearance at NASA telling me they faked it. Well, I'm like, let me, just investigate it. And so 3.5 years into the 7-year production, I'm going through the archives, just of the first mission, figuring if they faked it, they're more likely to have made a mistake the first time they faked it. So I go through everything, and it's almost the same footage over and over again. In fact, from the first mission, there's only like 15 pictures of an astronaut standing on the surface of the moon, and 0 pictures of Neil Armstrong because he didn't want his picture taken. It's kind of interesting. Well, I pop in this tape, and it says on the beginning of the reel in big letters, "Do not show to the public." And what was on the label and on the tape were 2 different things. And my whistleblower at NASA, thanks a colleague of his, also a whistleblower, sent me this tape. Well, it's unedited footage, behind the scenes footage of the crew of Apollo 11 faking the photography of being halfway to the moon. And you can see it for free, Sibrel.com, Moonman video links, and then click on "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon." And you'll see 2 days into the flight, I mean, this is dated by their own computer stamp, 2 days after they left, you'll see the crew of Apollo 11 using a 1-foot model of the Earth, pretending that it's the Earth floating in space. And you also hear a 3rd track of audio of the CIA prompting them to fake a 4-second radio delay as if they're beyond Earth orbit, which they never left. And what a surprise. 50 years later, they still cannot leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon in the Artemis mission. Strange, isn't it? You can drive cars and play golf on the moon in the 60s, but today you can only send mannequins to orbit the moon. In any case, that's the second proof. I showed it to 2 NBC News directors. They both agreed, it conclusively proved that the Apollo astronauts never left Earth orbit and therefore did not walk on the moon, and the moon missions were fake. 2 NBC News directors agreed. They flew me to New York City, put me up in the Waldorf Astoria, paid me thousands of dollars for the exclusive footage, which you can see for free at Sibrel.com. And they were going to break the news nationwide. NBC News, the moon missions are fake. They get a call from the federal government threatening them, and they backed down and didn't air the footage. So that's the second proof. Then the third proof is so simple. I'm a filmmaker, right? My job is to make fake scenes look real. All you have to do is go out and get a buddy and stand out in your front yard or parking lot at work during a sunny day with no clouds, and you'll see that you and the shadow of your friend or 2 telephone poles or 2 trees, they always run parallel. It's impossible with the sun 1,000,000 times bigger than the Earth, 93 million miles away. It casts shadows in the same direction over an entire continent or moon. Now, it's 20 times brighter on the moon than a desert at noon on Earth because it has no atmosphere. So the last thing you need is, lighting. And there's a picture from allegedly the last time they went to the moon, and it's the first clip at Sibrel.com, link number 1. You can see the shadow of an astronaut going at 12 o'clock and a shadow of a rock 5 feet away going at 9 o'clock. It's 90 degrees intersecting shadows from objects 5 feet apart. Impossible in sunlight, can only be done with electrical lighting. That would prove it in a court of law. And then finally, what you referred to, the deathbed confession. So I already knew the 4 things or the 3 things that I told you. And as I'm writing my book about it, which took 15 years and, millions of dollars of research and filming, and as I'm editing the book, which took 2 years, I'm put in touch with a gentleman who was there at Cannon Air Force Base June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. The guy was the chief of security. Now, every branch of the military has their special ops intelligence division. The Marines have it, the Army has it, and the Air Force has it. Well, the headquarters of the special ops, intelligence division of the United States Air Force is at Cannon Air Force Base, where this guy was the chief of security. As he's dying, wanting to get right with God, He tells his son, I am a murderer. I killed a coworker. And he said, why? He says, well, we both eyewitnessed the moon landing fraud. And my friend thought it was morally wrong. He was going to tell a reporter, and I killed him to cover it up. You don't make that stuff up as you're dying. Mm-hmm. And we have two other people who were there at that time. In fact, the chief of security was given personally by President Johnson, who was there for the first day of filming, a list of 15 VIP eyewitnesses who were allowed in to observe. He saved that as a memento. I received it and I published it in the book. Some of these people are still alive. People who are allowed in as visitors, and two of those people on the list were confirmed to be there that we know of. So we have the first proof. You can't have 1,000 times greater technology in the past and in the future. You have the second proof, classified footage of fake photography of a 1-foot model of the Earth with the third track of the CIA dated 2 days into the flight. We have this proof that of this deathbed confession, and we have proof of intersecting shadows, which can't be duplicated in sunlight, can only be duplicated in electrical light. We have more than enough proof. If it weren't for people's emotional attachment, this is like Santa Claus for adults, they would see the painful truth. And the government keeps, putting it down our throat every year. We really went to the moon. And if you go and do a Google search about moon landing fraud, you get nothing about the fraud. You get 1,001 videos about, don't believe Bart Sibrel, we really went to the moon. Now, if I went around, Mel, and was saying Mickey Mouse was the first president, not George Washington, do you think there'd be 1,001 videos on the internet to reassure the public? No, it was George Washington. So the fact that this is made out of straw is why it has to be defended by 1,001 videos.
Absolutely. And by the way, not to deviate, but you probably heard in May, Dmitry Rogozin, the former head of Russia's space agency, Roscosmos, endorsed the U.S. moon landing hoax. So even the Russians obviously know.
Yeah, they do know. And one of the alleged arguments to support the authenticity of the fake moon landings is, well, the Russians and Chinese would have found out and blurted it to the world. Well, you just have to think one more step, like a chess player. Mel, if I had, let's say, a picture of a world leader with a prostitute, I could upload it to the internet for free and ruin them. Or I could blackmail them year after year after year, asking for more money. What a coincidence. During the Nixon administration, which is when they faked the moon landing, he says out of one mouth, China is one of our greatest threats, then goes over there, kisses butt, and opens trade relations with them. He says the next week, Russia is the greatest threat. And then he starts selling grain to them below cost. I have a friend who works in the command center of the Chinese Space Agency. He told me that everyone there knows that the moon missions are fake and they are blackmailing NASA for technology in order to keep it a secret. They are on the record of never saying it was real. You see, their agreement is to not call them on it being fake. And in exchange for that, NASA is giving them technology under the table, which is a violation of the Espionage Act. However, because of their honor of such an old society, they actually have never said that it was real either. And until the former director of the Russian Space Agency, when he retired, he wasn't allowed to say it when he was in office because the Soviets are blackmailing the United States over this. He said, there's no proof that the moon missions are real. And then 2 days later, because that was a pretty big news story for a while in the alternative media, a lot of newspapers covered his admission that the moon missions are fake. This is the space agency director of Russia who put the first satellite in space, the first animal in space, the first man in space, the first crew of 3, the first spacewalk. They did all that first. They say the moon missions are fake. 2 days later, a major television network calls me up, says we're going to do a special about the moon landings. And they say, but we're already, just to let you know, we're going to conclude before interviewing you, before reading your book, before looking at your evidence, we're going to conclude that it's real. Apparently, this Russian guy making the news as rattled people. And so they immediately call me up and say, we got to do a TV special to reassure people that the moon missions are real without looking into the evidence of them being fraudulent. I talked to one of the reporters at the Washington Post who did a story on how interesting it is that some people think the moon landings are fake. I showed him this footage of fake photography, and he says, I can't explain that. And I said, yeah. Two NBC News directors say it proves they didn't go to the moon. Why don't you do a story about that? And he told me word for word, if I did that, I would be fired. If he uncovered government fraud and exposed it, he would be fired. How about that? Free
Is
press,
it because
right?
they have an NDA?
No, it's that the world is controlled top down. And it's no surprise that the CIA and CNN have the exact same ideology. You know, one of the clips, go to Sibrel.com, click on the top left button, Moonman video links, and I forget what it is, but it's toward like link 14 or something. We showed Dan Rather on national TV 2 days after Kennedy was shot, saying, you know, the Zapruder film is too horrific to show. So let me describe it for you. Well, in this video, it is synchronized with the Zapruder film. And out of Dan Rather's own mouth, and he looks down when he says it because he's too ashamed. He says, in the third fatal shot, you can see Kennedy's head go violently forward while it's going violently backward. In 1963, they said the exact opposite of the truth on national television. Exact opposite. Right? So, and this was back when you can only own one TV station and one radio station. Now you can own as many as you want. One of the clips at Sibrel.com is a compilation of news stories. And look in the bottom right-hand corner, ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, they're saying the same story word for word on all networks. If you're working at McDonald's and your manager says, drop a basket of fries, and you say, no, I'm going to cook hamburgers, you're fired. And I worked at NBC News for 2 years. And after the first broadcast, which I personally edited, they said to one another, good show, good show, good show. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Show? This is news. And they said, Bart, wake up. It's a show. If a nuclear bomb was dropped on Washington, D.C., and the owner of the station said, we want the lead story to be about a cat who had 20 kittens, guess what the lead story would be? They do what they're told. They say what they are told. And they are told, if you want to work for the Washington Post and have that money and that feather in your cap, you write what we say and don't write what we say, don't write about. End of story. He told me so himself.
But you mentioned the Zapruder film, and a lot of people don't know this. People think that the film was released shortly after the assassination, but it took 11 years and 3 months for the Zapruder film to be first publicly shown. Do you think a lot of people know that?
No, it's just amazing. But the public has figured it out over the years. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr., right? He has more access to the Kennedy assassination files than Oliver Stone does. And his opinion is the following. The CIA murdered his uncle, President John Kennedy. So if a guy that much in the know, if that's his opinion, it's my opinion too. And so then we have about a year later, we have Robert McNamara, defense secretary of the Vietnam War, and the American public is against it, just like they were against World War II, December 6, 1941 and before. Do you realize on December 6, 1941 and before, 90% of Americans did not want to get involved in World War II.
Right.
Pearl Harbor happens, 90% are for it. So Robert McNamara gets together with the CIA. This is his admission as he's dying, wants to set the record straight. He says, we in the CIA got together and we said we need some sort of Pearl Harbor incident to get the public, support for the Vietnam War. So it's called the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where allegedly a North Vietnamese ship attacked an American ship. He said, as he was dying, that never happened. We made it up. That led to the death of 3 million people, including 58,220 of Americans. Now, if they're willing to kill 58,220 of their own soldiers without cause and their president, I think they're willing to fake an image on the moon. Don't you think, Mel?
Absolutely. And do you think that a coup took place on November 22nd, 1963, and things have never been the same?
Absolutely. If you believe in the Bible, or at least, spiritual things, take a look at this. In 2017, there was an eclipse in the United States of America, which is different than any other country in the world. It's new, it's different. It was founded on different principles, and where it is today compared to those original principles is so far gone, it's mind-boggling. Well, in 2017, a solar eclipse hit America, and the dark spot fell over Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee has the largest pagan statue in America. So tall, in the hand of the statue is a 6-foot statue of a man. 7 years later, next year, April 8th, 2024, another eclipse is going to hit America, and the dark spot is falling over Dallas, Texas. I think, just like you said, it's the point of no return of the United States of America. It's a 7 biblical year time period between both eclipses. I think it's a probationary period from our Maker for the United States to stop being so corrupt, killing their own presidents, lying continually. The last chapter of my book is what to do about this mess. And one of the things I propose is if a politician makes a pledge to do something and they later don't do it, or make a pledge not to do something and they later do it, number one, that's their last day in office. And number two, they go to jail for 20 years. We have people running for president who swear they will never do this. 6 weeks into the president, see, they do it. And no one holds them accountable. It just boggles the mind. You have Bernie Sanders receiving more votes than Hillary Clinton, and she receives twice as many delegates anyway. And then the person who leaks out the fix, the FBI doesn't go after the people doing the fix. They go after the person leaking about the fix. That's our country. You have William Benny, who worked for the NSA for 30 years, goes on national TV and says, oh, by the way, we spy on the private cell phone conferences of Supreme Court justices so that we can get sexual and financial impropriety on them, so that we can blackmail them into voting the way that we tell them. It's an established fact on national TV that was undisputed that Supreme Court justices are being blackmailed by the NSA and the CIA. Not a single congressional investigation. You would think that. Talk about the revelations that came out in the 70s. The Select Committee on Assassination, right, 1975, concluded, after the Zapruder film comes out, with 100% certainty, there was a second gunman to the Kennedy assassination. Now, I've been to the post office a few times, and I've never seen on the 10 most wanted list the killer of the United States president at large. You would think they would be number one, don't you? I mean, how can they not be number one? I don't understand that. It just boggles the mind how corrupt the government is. They completely control the media. Woodward and Bernstein, who broke Watergate, found a CIA document in 1974, back when you could only own one TV and radio station, which Clinton, undid and said you can own everything. And it said at that time that the CIA had 400 journalists on their payroll, working at ABC, NBC, CBS, Time, Life, Newsweek, Associated Press, and Reuters. I mean, that just about covers it. Imagine how many people they have now.
I'm glad we're visiting other doors and opening other doors. Anthony Scalia, the Supreme Court justice who died, a lot of people don't know, but there's a lot of mysterious circumstances surrounding that death during the Obama administration. But let me go back for a second to this Zapruder film. Over 11 years before the people saw that footage, don't you think in 11 years they could very well doctor that footage to portray what they want us to see?
They could, but they could get caught doing that. And if they got caught doing that, that would make it all the more correct that Oswald didn't do it. They have such control of it. They don't need to do that. For example, it used to be said in military ghost intelligence circles, if you're not cooperating, be careful. Bullets are cheap. You know what they say now? You're not worth a bullet. They they don't have to rig elections. They don't have to. If they do that, it's a last resort. They can control what people think. What Joe Rogan came out that they were suppressing all of this stuff on Hunter Biden's laptop. Not that I take sides. I don't vote. I don't take sides. But the point is, it made one candidate who was running for president look bad. So they suppressed it. Well, that's election interference, isn't it? I mean, if the truth about something going on that makes them, corrupt or points to corruption would affect the election, which I think it would have. And then they always blame the Russians. I mean, 9/11 was somebody else. And it's always the Russians and the Chinese. We forget that when people take an oath of office in the military, police, Coast Guard, they swear allegiance not to a come and go president, but to the Constitution of the United States, right? Who has supremacy, the Pope or the Bible? Some people think the Pope. I think the Bible, and I think the Constitution. So they swear to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have 3,000 engineers who signed a petition risking their reputation and their livelihood, said it's mechanically impossible for a pinhole airplane to go in and out of a steel grid and to cause it collapse. It could be hit with 10 airplanes and it would not collapse. It's said it's like throwing a pencil through a screen door. All you have to do is look at Oklahoma City bombing. Half the building was blown away. That's a lot more than a pinhole, don't you think? Did it collapse? No, because it's impossible. And so who did it? They say explosives. So if explosives did it while the government is blaming airplanes from box cutter terrorists, then that means the United States did it. Who killed President Kennedy? The United States government. Who faked the Gulf of Tonkin? The United States government. Who faked the moon landing? The United States government. Who staged 9/11? The United States government. Who did this last thing for the last 3 years? The United States government. I mean, it boggles the mind how corrupt they are. Mel, when I was a hot filmmaker in Nashville in my 20s, I worked like 2 days a week. So I'd go see, what was it? The Truman Show in the middle of the week. 20-year-old taking a Tuesday off, 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm like the only one in the theater watching the Truman Show. And I start seeing the Truman Show and I'm like, this is dumb. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I hardly ever walk out of a movie. I think twice in the last 20 years. That was one. Now I love the movie and I cry every time I see it. But back then it was like, this is dumb. It's not plausible. If I told you a script, Mel, where a government kills their own president and they get away with it, they start wars, with imaginary causes and get away with it. They fake moon landings and get away with it. They kill their own people in broad daylight and get away with it. You would throw it in the garbage and say, this script is not plausible, and this is the world we live in. And if you believe in God and, entities opposed to God, that's the thing about the moon landing. It's different. It's different in a couple of ways. Whoever killed Kennedy, Kennedy's still dead. Whoever did 9/11, all those people are still dead. It's just relabeling who did it. This is different. This is a positive lie. This is taking candy away from a baby and giving them a turd instead. One of those two news directors who agreed that it proved that they didn't go to the moon, one of them was, days away from broadcasting it before they were shut down by the federal government. The other one didn't want to have anything to do with it. You know what he said? He said, I don't want to go down in history as the man who caused the next Civil War, because he thought if the American public finds out that they faked the moon landing that they got down on their knees and prayed for the safety of the astronauts, the ones they cried for, the one they waved their flag for, the one they hold ticker tape parades for, the one they printed on coins, the one they printed in encyclopedia, the one they printed on stamps, the one that they give the men medals of honor for being such a good liar. If they find out that was fake, he figured it'd be the finger out of the dike and it would cause the collapse of the government. And maybe he's right. Even though the fraud probably killed fewer people than the Kennedy assassination witness list who were knocked off, it's the most embedded in their heart, and it's symbolic. I highly recommend people go to Sibrel.com for free. Click on Moonman video links. I think it's the second link. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. I open up with the Tower of Babel. Until about 200 years ago, the greatest technological achievement for thousands of years was simply how tall you can build a building without it collapsing on itself. The Bible says in Genesis 6 that the Tower of Babel was built for that reason. It was built to boast. Our nation is the best. Well, it was never finished. Go forward thousands of years in time. The 20th century begins, the technological age, and man gets together and they build the largest single machine ever built, the Titanic. And they put in a publicity poster, the ship that God himself could not sink.
1 second.
Also,
I'm glad you're opening this because you were mentioning false flags that are recent. But I could say that Pearl Harbor was a false flag. At least we knew for a couple of weeks before the Japanese attacked. 1898, the sinking of the Maine. What do we get? Spanish-American War. 1915, the sinking of the Maine, World War I. The Lusitania, World War I. And you mentioned the Titanic, 1912. What do we get afterwards? The Federal Reserve. And when you start looking, really surgically looking into who was there and why these people, some of the richest men in the world, did not get a lifeboat, makes you wonder. But that's for another story. I didn't mean to interject, Bart.
No, that's an extremely valid point. Let me add to it. I'm really not, believe it or not, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I take people at their word. I had an eyewitness at NASA who said it was fake, and I said, I'm going to still think they went until I have proof. I heard about chemtrails, 10 years ago. I'm thinking, that's dumb. If that were going on, we would notice. And then I realized I just never look up. And I went through a period of about a year where I was getting up about a half an hour before sunrise. And I went out on my porch. I live nowhere near the airport and not that big of a city. And there's a literal grid in the sky. When someone exhales, how long does it stay in the air? Not long. That's what a condensation trail is from a jet. When you see one of those, you can see it disappears very quickly. These were in a grid like mowing a yard, and they stayed there for an hour and a half, and they widened and widened and widened until they filled all the gaps. This went on for months, ending right at sunrise where no one would see it. I thought chemtrails was stupid and ridiculous, and it ended up being absolutely true. I have dozens of pictures of it. Then I hear about the Titanic. Oh, give me a break. Everything's not a conspiracy, and then I study it, and yes, it were all the bankers on there. And why would you build a ship that could have 2,500 people and only have 1,500 boats? And there were, 1,000 men on there, which, back in the chivalry days would choose to stay. And if you're a, billionaire, trillionaire, I mean, what is it to build, in today's dollars, you're a trillionaire. What is it to build a $1 billion boat and sink it if you can conveniently kill 50 people at the same time? That if you knocked off with a bullet on each one, they'd catch you by about the fourth one, I mean, who knows? These people are murderers, right? They kill their own people. They are heartless. And of course, another thing in the book, which I've never talked about publicly, you alluded to at the introduction, when I found that classified footage of fake photography, I had major problems. I was followed from church. I was abducted on the doorsteps of CNN by the CIA to prevent me from getting the tape in the door. And fortunately, it was a copy. I was drugged with truth serum to the point of vomiting. I escaped their custody, made my way back to Nashville. I peed in a cup. I said, hey, I got him.
When did that happen, Bart?
That was in 1999. And So I pee in a cup. I take it to, I give it to a friend to take to a lab in his name, trying to outwit the CIA. I checked the report a couple of days later. He says, well, there was a problem at the lab. And I'm like, well, what problem? And he said, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. I said, yeah, what of it? And then he says, get this, funny thing, the only thing stolen was your urine sample. Really freaked people out at the lab. They say, we don't know who you are, but take your business elsewhere. So one of these guys that was following me, he pulled out too quick. I pulled over and refused to go forward, and he gave it up and went past me. I followed him, and I pull up alongside the guy to look at him, know the enemy. And I don't know if you've ever seen those documentaries, scuba documentaries. You see a great white shark and they hang a piece of meat over the boat and it leaps out, and you see that eye. That eye is about the size of a saucer. You know what I say about that eye? It's soulless. I say there's nobody at home. That's how this guy looked. I've never seen it in a human being before. This intelligence agent looked like he would kill me and go home and have a nice fried chicken dinner, not think about it ever again. He looked soulless, scared me like I'd never been scared before in a spiritual way, that a human being could do that. You hear these horrific stories about child molestation or murder or rape or kidnapping. And are there really people who do those things? Are there really that wicked, soulless, hard-hearted people? And apparently there are. And I've met them face to face. And I talk about this in my book.
See, and most people are surprised that this is all coming out now. I've been discussing sexual trafficking, child exploitation, organ harvesting. And back 15 years ago, it was almost like watching roadkill. It's there, you don't want to look at it, and people just do not want to hear about it. But now, the movie Sound of Freedom is coming out. By the way, it's beating Indiana Jones, which is great. Disney, just go away. But all this is coming out, and people are finally waking up. Do you think that after, and I hate to even use this word because this is the word that gets me censored all the time, do you think that people are waking up? And I'm not talking about right wing, left wing, because they're all in this together. Do you think people are waking up to the truth? And that's why they're looking at the moon now and thinking, wait a second, how did we lose the telemetry? How do we lose all the footage? How do we lose the technology? And 50 some years later, which would be cheaper to get there than it was in the 1960s, and we can go there? Don't you think people are smart enough to say there's something fishy going on here?
Yeah, I would say, there's people who are hypnotized and cannot be unhypnotized. There were the people who are already open-minded, and then there were the people in the middle who weren't sure. And it was things like, and I don't use the C word because I think they scan the audio. I say this thing that's been going on for the last 3 years, and then I say the medicine, and I say the company that makes the medicine, and I say the former vice president of the company who makes the medicine instead of the person's name. But all that to say, yes, I think that's happening. I did an interview, my first interview with Coast to Coast. Our film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, outsold Gladiator Academy Award winner for a couple of days when it first came out. It really, got people's attention. I got 2,000 emails in one day. And back then, I would say 9 out of 10 of them were, how dare you say, such an unpatriotic thing as the great and glorious moon landings are fake. They don't understand what was unpatriotic was to fake them. How ironic that their heroes are scoundrels. That's sad. And so, but now 99% of the emails I get are supportive. And I think there is an awakening. In fact, I get a lot of emails lately. People said when they studied 9/11 and realized it wasn't done by airplanes, that opened their mind to the moon landing fraud. Here I am, the producer of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. And I think chemtrails is silly, and that they sunk the Titanic on purpose is silly. And then I start looking into it, and it becomes less and less and less silly. How sad is that?
Well, I remember back in 2015, immediately after our interview aired, I got a lot of people, same thing, how dare you? But one of those how dare yous was from a dear friend, a former business colleague whom I've known forever. And she said, how dare you? My dad worked for NASA. My dad worked in Florida. He knows that they went to the moon and blah, blah, blah. A lot of people react that way. It's so compartmentalized that they don't know the left hand from the right one.
Yeah, I mean, that's like saying my uncle sold peanuts at the Super Bowl, and so he says the game wasn't fixed, so it must not be fixed. I mean, he's clueless. There was a guy who worked in the command center in 1969 during the launch to the moon, which I show in my film. At the opening of the film, there's a little tracking shot past the computer controllers a minute before they go to the moon. And they're all kicked back watching television like everybody else. One of those guys said afterwards he can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and an actual flight, just a bunch of numbers going by on the screen. He can't tell any difference whatsoever between the, quote, rehearsal flight and the, quote, real flight. If he can't tell in command center, do you think the CIA is so stupid that they're going to tell the guy making the glove or the door handle or the boot, hey, we're really not going to the moon. Be sure not to tell anybody. That's like saying what the teller at Wells Fargo Bank and what the CEO at Wells Fargo Bank know about the corruption in the bank are identical. The teller is clueless. So 145,000 people made the atomic bomb and only 8 knew what they were doing. And once that rocket goes up, there's no independent press coverage. I mean, think of all the millions of eyewitnesses we have, billions to World War II. But this is the most historic event of the day with no independent press coverage whatsoever. Whatever picture comes from the government, if they say it's from the moon, then it's from the moon. There wasn't even a live transmission during the landing. I mean, come on. If I were in charge of NASA and the moon mission were real, I would mount a camera on the side of that rocket and have a live feed of the moon getting bigger, 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 all the way down uninterrupted to prove that we went. And here it is. You can watch it at any time. Suddenly they turn on a picture. It's black and white. Now, here's what they did as a filmmaker. You had the network saying, well, give us a cable and let us plug that, into our television station. They said, no, we're not going to do that. What we'll do is we'll project the image on a huge screen, 6 by 8 feet, and imagine projection quality of 1969. Then with that, we're going to photograph that with a camera. That will go to a monitor, and then you can film the monitor. And that's what we have today. You mentioned that things disappear. That's really an indirect fifth proof that they didn't go to the moon. Imagine Bill Gates spending $200 billion, which is the equivalent of the cost of going to the moon in today's dollars. He spends that money to build the first supercomputer. It works fantastic, works the first time you turn it on, works 6 more times. It's fantastic. Turns it off, throws all the hardware in a furnace, throws the schematics, the blueprints, the software, everything in the furnace. That's actually what they did. One of the clips at Sibrel.com is NASA's own Don Pettit saying, I'd love to go to the moon, but we intentionally destroyed the technology. Now, why would they do that? If there was any technology you were going to intentionally destroy, might be the atomic bomb. But just 10 years after the atomic bomb went off for the first time, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. So if we could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1960s technology that had 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. You can't travel 1,000 times further into space in 1969 than you can in 2023, unless they bluffed, which is exactly what they did. So really destroying the technology is actually proof they didn't go. Because if you really went, you would never destroy a $200 billion investment, but they took all the hardware, all the schematics, all the blueprints of the Apollo equipment, and all the original videotapes, and all the original telemetry to show where the rocket really was, and they intentionally destroyed it. You would never do that if you really went, and that is exactly what you would do if you perpetrated a fraud. So the fact that they destroyed everything is actually proof of the fraud.
And one of the things that they say, and I remember speaking with Nick Pope years ago about this, and he said, well, we went, and the proof of this is that there's a mirror there that you can take a laser. What do you say to people when they mention that mirror that was supposedly placed there?
Well, that's a pretty lame excuse. Basically, if you get older copies of Scientific American magazine, which we bought at auction because I have a millionaire backing me, we bought some documents for $10,000 each from dead Apollo astronauts' estates. And they were bouncing lasers off the moon in the late 1950s to calibrate the exact distance of the moon from the Earth. They did it. Because the moon has reflective surfaces all over it. You don't need a mirror. So all they had to do is pick a reflective location as the landing site and claim that there's a mirror there. Secondly, the Soviets sent an unmanned probe to the moon with a laser reflector on it too. So that's really no proof either. And then they say, well, the NASA satellite orbiting the moon shows these little shadows, and that's supposed to be the lunar module, and here's the shadow, that's supposed to be the flag. So you're saying that the people who faked the moon landing with photography, more fake pictures are proof that they went? I mean, you're asking O.J. Simpson for proof that he, committed murder? Really? Okay. So I don't think he's going to give that. And so that doesn't make any sense. They already faked full body resolution pictures, here on Earth at Cannon Air Force Base. So I don't think it's much big of a deal with Photoshop technology 50 years later to fake a little shadow dot on the moon's surface. And why can Google satellite, orbiting at, let's say, 26,000 miles, take a picture of a license plate, but this lunar satellite orbiting at 6,000 miles can't take, a fingerprint, on the moon, which they've never done. In fact, there was a company, and I talk about this in my book, I think it's called Astrobic Technology, wanted to, solve this mystery, whether we went or not, once and for all, said we're going to launch a probe, we're going to land it on the Apollo 11 site and turn on our camera. NASA forbid them. They said, we're going to pass a law making that illegal. Now, wait a minute. If there's all this scuttlebutt of if they, went or did not go, and they really went, they would say, absolutely, thank you. Let's put an end to this. But they forbid it. I mean, it's mind-boggling. All of their behavior supports that they didn't go to the moon. In fact, the administrator of NASA, days before the first Apollo mission, resigned without explanation. I mean, you're about to win the Super Bowl as coach, and then you resign? Well, what's that all about? You see, 2 of the 3 astronauts on the first mission to the moon don't give interviews unless the president personally asks them to. And on the 25th anniversary, when Clinton asked Neil Armstrong to speak for the first time in many years, he said to a group of high school students going through the White House, perhaps someday you'll be able to remove one of truth's protective layers.
Yeah.
So the great thing about the book, Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker at the CIA hit list, is I have information in there that's not in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, including the eyewitness testimony of Cyrus Eugene Akers, who I witnessed the filming of the moon landing and murdered a coworker in his own words to cover it up. And then the second to the last chapter is called NASA's Greatest Fear. At the time of the production, mind you, I have $1 million budget. I interviewed some key people who asked me not to publish my findings until after their death. One of those people I interviewed, her name is Betty Grissom. She is the widow
Gus
of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. I interviewed her for 4 hours. She told me that weeks before her husband mysteriously died, he was so frustrated that nothing would work. They couldn't even get a wired intercom between 2 buildings to work. One of his last words were, if we can't get a wired intercom to work between 2 buildings, how are we going to go to the moon? And my own film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. I don't draw attention to it with the narration, but you see Neil Armstrong 6 weeks before they go to the moon on the ground in front of reporters in a mock spacesuit, picking up a rock with a pole with a bag on the end of it, picking up a moon rock on Earth to practice getting the first moon rock. The bag falls off the end of the stick. They can't get that to work. Can you imagine? So she told me that he was so frustrated that they were a decade behind schedule. In his opinion, after all, he is the pilot going to the moon for the first time. I think he would know. And of course, the higher ups knew they were going to fake the moon landing, but hadn't told the astronauts yet. So why fix this equipment and spend the money that we can spend elsewhere? We're not going to use it anyway. He was so furious. Days before he dies, he holds an impromptu press conference, grabs a bunch of reporters who were camped out at NASA, says, let's go to the top of the rocket. I want you to take a picture or something. Takes them up the elevator to the top of the rocket. And where he had affixed a lemon the size of a grapefruit. And he said, this thing is a lemon, a piece of junk. Some general saw that, boat rocker, who was also preparing congressional reports about criticizing NASA being 10 years or more away from going to the moon, which were confiscated from his home by the CIA before they even told his widow that he was dead.
That was an unauthorized press conference that he did. Do you think that's the reason why they all burned up?
Yeah, absolutely. What she told me, again, 4-hour interview with the dead man's wife, right? She said on January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said the following, "Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today, monkeying with the equipment. I wonder why." Very next day, he's dead by, quote, faulty equipment. It's her 100% conclusion that the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon was murdered by the CIA. I interviewed her son, Scott Grissom, for 3 hours. His conclusion is 100% his father was murdered by the CIA. He's a 747 pilot. He's looked at forensic evidence from the burned spacecraft and knows that that fire was set intentionally. You see, so this is the thing. If they faked the moon landing and didn't kill anybody, you might have a little, I don't know, I hate to say it, admiration for their ingenuity and their cleverness, for faking it, but not when you widow women and orphan children in the process. You see, our Constitution is not the first document of America. It's the Declaration of Independence. And it says, when any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. We actually have a right to get rid of the federal government if they start taking away life, killing their own people, taking away liberty. You have to ask permission to open your business, and taking away the pursuit of happiness where you can't go to church. You're going to have to stay at home. I don't care if 9 out of 10 people are dropping dead from an illness. It's still your right to go out and shop under those circumstances. It's still your right to open your business under those circumstances. You still have 10% of the population who needs toilet paper and tuna fish. Where are they going to get it from? You see, this whole idea that we have to ask permission for everything is slavery. It's amazing. We're told we're the most free nation on earth when we're the most enslaved. We have to ask permission to open our business, permission to go shopping, permission to go to church, whatever excuses. One federal judge says, the Constitution doesn't change with the weather or what's the right word? Illnesses circling around. It doesn't change. It is what it is. People have the right. It says the government will not establish a religion or prevent the free exercise thereof, and they closed churches down. You see, do you realize statistically, even if the numbers are true about this alleged illness for the last 3 years, which I know people who work in the medical industry who says they're labeling, suicide, decapitation from motorcycle accidents, the death of this illness when it wasn't. They say, that you have a right to go to church under those circumstances. It doesn't matter. It's like they're our parent and we're the child, they're a master and we're the slave. Back in colonial days, right? We had the, Independence Day a couple of days ago. You know what they would say to each other? They said, servant, your servant, sir, your servant, your servant. And they're called public servants. They're not. They're public masters. We are the most enslaved nation on earth. I visited countries that they call, quote, second world, and there's much more freedom here, much more regulation, less regulation to open your business, much lower taxes. Another thing that we're told is that the United States has the best healthcare in the world. The exact opposite is true. It's an established fact of the leading causes of death. If you remove heart disease And if you remove cancer, the next leading cause of death is medical malpractice. 70% of Americans are taking prescription medicine. That means 70% of Americans are sick all the time. Is there any nation on earth that has 70% of the population sick all the time? Whatever nation that is, that has the least worst healthcare in the world, not the best. You see, we're being lied to continually, and I guess most people are believing it.
Well, I think that was an experiment for the last 3 years. And I wrote an article, anybody can read it on our website, setting the record straight. States, not Washington, built our nation. That discusses what you just said. You know, these last 3 years, it was an experiment to just see how much pushback people would get. And, you know, 2 countries in the world that tax their citizens when they move away to another country, China and the USA. And only 1 country has a law that would tax a citizen anywhere in the universe, the USA. But we have so much more to discuss when we come back. We have to take our one and only break. But let me just say this before we break. A lot of people say to me, Mel, what do you think about the ISS, the International Space Station? And I started looking into it, Bart. And I know that sometimes you don't discuss certain things because you need proof. But I was thinking, you know, what's the size of the ISS? It's about 109 meters, 358 feet. And then you have a jetliner like a Boeing 747 or an Airbus 380, A380, and it's about 70 to 80 meters or 230 to 260 feet, not that far apart. But the ISS is about 254 miles away, and we can still see it at night. Yet, imagine a plane at maybe 50 or 100 miles away. Can we even see it? So what exactly is flying above us 24/7, Bart?
Well, there's lots of stuff. The government does have technology. Most of it is weapons-based is their focus, unfortunately. That is more advanced than we know. We don't really need as much hardware as we used to, not with space-based weapons, which they definitely have. They could zap something and cause a building to catch on fire. They just put a laser you can't see. It heats up the building, causes a fire. Little side note, in the last year and a half, 140 food processing plants have mysteriously burned up without explanation in the United States. I mean, imagine if in the last year and a half, 140 McDonald's caught fire. You would say, obviously, there's a terrorist pattern here. So, and yet not a single one of these was in the national news. You know, it's interesting when you had that trucker strike in Canada. So for an entire week, the border of the leading world country was blocked for an entire week. Never mentioned in the evening news, but the president getting a cat, that was mentioned in the evening news because they don't want protests to become contagious. When they want riots and destruction, then they cover those. But when they have real protests that are historical, they don't mention them because they don't want to spread them. It's complete propaganda. The moon landing fraud is the pinnacle thereof.
Well, same thing's happening in France. That's why Macron came on the news yesterday saying we need to censor all social media platforms. We cannot let this information go out. You know what's happening in France right now. But I'm looking at an article here that I saw about the ammonium nitrate that was lost here in the United States. But let me just read this and we'll take the break. Somebody said this: I'm old enough to remember and can vividly recall a situation that occurred a mere few weeks ago when a staggering 30,000 tons of ammonium nitrate mysteriously vanished from a rail shipment bound for California. It's disheartening to observe that this incident has seemingly faded from people's collective memory. It's worth noting that ammonium nitrate undergoes oxidation upon exposure to sunlight, resulting in an intriguing orange hue. This is giving Blade Runner 2049 vibes. Just thought I'd share this information, and that he's referring to what happened in June. If you remember those pictures from New York, it looks exactly like the Blade Runner movie, and all those fires. I've seen videos of those fires igniting all at the same time. I'll get your take on this because that's very mysterious as well. But how can people buy the book your videos, watch more of your information, and learn more about your work, Bart?
Yeah, you just go to my lastname.com, S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. You can get this book on audio, which I read myself, Kindle or print, and it has 16 free interactive video links, all of which is at Sibrel.com.
Excellent. Well, folks, one more hour to come, and we'll dig deeper with Bart Sibrel. This is Mel Hostelrick, and you are listening to Veritas. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this important Veritas interview. To listen to the rest and all of our exclusive material, proceed to the Veritas Plus member section or join the Veritas Plus family by subscribing. Click on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. Don't forget to visit the Veritas store for focused life force energy. Get a 15-day free trial of FLFE today with no credit card required. And if you want to get in touch with Mel, want to be a guest on this radio program, have a guest suggestion, or have feedback, just click on the contact button on our website at veritasradio.com. Now, proceed to the Veritas Plus member section or subscribe to listen to the rest of the interview. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to Veritas, because you don't want to believe, you want to know.
When I was born in 65, Grandma Ruth said never lie. The key to life was only truth. Listen to Grandma, old Ruth. In the Bible, Ruth refused to go until the truth she was to know. Great God man said truth to be, would loose my chains, set me free. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. A funny thing, my first big film, loved and hated like the heat of a kiln. Hero to some, others wish dead. Hard success, hard head. Astronauts wild, I never flinched. My armor was the truth I pinched. Nervous now that I was groovy, sweaty palms just watching that movie. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. And cursed, punched in the face, I'm facing this life of the human race. Some say patriot, some say traitor. Guess it depends on historical speculators. Astronaut sons of the CIA to take my life far away. Instead the curse fell on his head at 26. He's stone cold dead. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said said the truth was worth the die. To beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth. And dear old grandma, old Ruth. Seeds to root, grow up large, a truthful shoot. Then someday when I am old, they'll tell my story I long ago told. Except now they'll say instead of Ruth, Bart's the grandpa of this old truth. Not really true, 'twas Bill before me, and Jesus my brother, waiting for me in glory. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead my train derailed my truth by dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth the die. To beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth. And dear old grandma, old Ruth. Like dear old grandma, old Ruth. Love dear old grandpa, old